Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are diving into the world of Top 10 from Alan Moore, Gene Ha, and Zander Cannon. And I feel like we don't always mention the letterer, but Todd Klein does some heavy lifting here.
Yeah, he does some cool. He doesn't have a lot to do, but when he shows up, like when he's needed to bring something different, he does it. You know?
Well, so that's actually my first question was, so
Sure.
First of all,
we should say real quick, this is volume 1.
So volume 1, issues 1 through 7, yeah.
1 through 7, yep. So, sorry, go ahead, jump in.
No, I opened, I was reading the first issue, which I have in this big compendium edition, and what is it, 3-4 pages in, you get some dialogue from Phantom.
Yeah, yes. But you don't know anything about her.
Right. And I thought, this is so crappy. I cannot believe DC Black Label botched this print job. I was like getting ready to stop reading and send an email to DC and with a picture and be like, what the hell, guys? And then I was like, wait a second. It's Alan Moore. Let me just finish the issue. And then you see the character is always some different opacity, like some level of transparent, translucent.
Yeah, her power is she's Kitty Pryde. Yeah, she can phase through, and so, but you don't know that when you first see her, she is completely solid, and then as the issues go on, she becomes more and more translucent until the very end when she has a drink with Toy Box when she's barely there. And then it starts to make more sense. But you're right. It starts off the first character.
I've never been so glad I didn't send an email.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was let me just. Well, what I did was I pulled out. I have, spot issues of this. So I dug through my long boxes in the attic and pulled out Top 10 number 1, flipped to the same page and saw that it was faded there.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, now what are the chances? This misprint or fading or getting rubbed by something happened on both of these. So I was like, okay, now that I know it's intentional, because you do get printing errors, that happens.
Yeah.
So you can't rule that out. But once I accepted okay, this was an intentional choice, I was then paying a lot more attention to okay, well, it's only happening when this character speaks, which you don't know any of the. So here's the thing.
What does it mean? Yeah.
Right. What's it mean? But the entry into this world, I feel like it's pretty common to have, we're going to get to know this precinct by, meeting the new person in the office, the new person of the precinct. That's a pretty
audience
common
avatar.
Pretty common. Well, yes, pretty common conceit. The problem is most of us have seen a police procedural before. That's not the problem. So she's new to the office, but she is not new to the world. And we're all new to the world.
Yeah.
And that's what I was kind of hinting at in the Zero last week about Alan Moore, is just it's all in his head. You have to trust him. And you're probably going to have to reread in order to be oh, that's this character now. Yeah. But he keeps introducing them in pairs. And
yes. Yeah, well, because they're cops.
Is, right, they're partners. That makes sense. But it's not here's a foolish about Toy Box and Spax, so we know them pretty well, and here's a full issue about Dwayne and Pete, so we know them pretty well. Nope, they're all scrambled together, and which is what a procedural does.
It is. If it were on television, we would ostensibly our main characters, if there are any, are Toy Box and Smacks, because Toy Box is our first character. We meet her, as I said, she's the audience avatar. If this were a TV show, we'd be following her story as she interacts with her new partner, who is obviously the grizzled, grouchy loner that no one wants to work with. You put the rookie with that guy. You meet the other pairs, the other cops, other detectives. You meet the sergeant. You navigate the world through their eyes. But as you go through, you jump around. You move through the precinct. And once you're introduced to these characters, you just jump into them and you follow them for a little bit. You follow them home, you follow them after work, you follow them on whatever active cases they're on, and you just jump back and forth. And it is very seamless. It's very fly on the wall, as opposed to like one person narrative, as opposed to just sticking and we only see what Toy Box sees. We only sees what the quote unquote new character sees. You're jumping around and you have to just kind of sit and take it all in. Going back to the beginning, I love what you said about kind of getting thrown in and how dense it is, and the idea that the specific precinct and the characters there are new to Toy Box, are a sense of kind of avatar character, but the world isn't new to her, but it is new to us. And I love on that very, very, very first page, you have these 4 panels where we just see our character, and I think it's very intentional that she's not quote unquote costumed.
Right.
That our character,
yes.
Well, we find out she has the toy box, she has these toys that she can control and do things with. That's her power, as it were. But she is not costumed. She is simply dressed like, unfortunately, someone would have dressed at the, in 1999.
Hey now.
Yeah. I mean, but the point is,
I'm catching strays here. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm in that picture. So whatever. But the fact that those first 2 panels, those top 2 panels of her on the subway, she's surrounded by people in quote unquote regular clothing.
Right.
She's just, and she doesn't look out of place there. And then, the second panel is that clearly it's the subway stopped, people are getting off, and then people start getting on to the third panel, and now all of a sudden she's surrounded by people in costumes and she's just sitting there. She's not disturbed by this, whatever. This is normal for her. And so you have this top part, the top part of the page of like regular people, as you transition then into why is everyone wearing this crazy stuff, until we get to the next page, the full page splash of we see Neapolis, and as she departs the train, everyone there is just in a costume. And
if you didn't know, you would think this is a story about someone going to Comic-Con.
Yeah,
the train stop where the hotel is,
or this is someone who's entering a new world.
Yes,
this is an outsider coming into the new world, but again, she's not put off by any of this. Maybe she's put off by someone's specific powers, like the blind Zen taxi driver, but the idea of that doesn't put her off, because this is the world that she lives in. This is the world that exists around her. So we see her comfort and her just kind of whateverness around it. And I think it's meant to put the reader in that, okay, this is just the world we're in. We have to accept it because she's accepting it. She's not out of place here. We're the ones that are out of place. And so I love that little bit there. And I also love that right away, like, before really the first text box or any dialogue, the first text on the page are the subway ads, the ads on top of the car, and like they start off with Easter eggs right away.
I mean, it's good training for what you're going to encounter.
Yeah. And look, we're not going to go through and list all of them. There are way too many, but I love a couple of these right up the bat. Like the clothing store is called the Phone Booth. Up there is it's called Logan's DNA, which is an herbal supplement. It says like with like now with extra adamantium in it. There's an Action Insurance, and you kind of see the logo. It looks like someone's lifting a car, which is the image from Action number 1.
Injured, the Legion of Superheroes. Legion of
Superlords, absolutely.
Superlawyers. Yeah, so I couldn't even stop myself from auto-completing this.
But it's little things like that. And so if your eye catches that should put you an idea of, like this is what it is. And then maybe you start looking at some of the random characters in the background and think, is this if your question is that, hey, that character looks vaguely like this other well-known character from one of the big 2, I wonder if that's intentional. The answer's got to be yes.
Yeah, well, including the police precinct looking like the Hall of Justice, looking like the Cincinnati Union Terminal
Center. Yeah. There is nothing unintentional here about any of the art, especially the stuff in the background, the stuff that totally doesn't matter. That's just them riffing on stuff, putting stuff in the background, kind of like what we talked about when we talked about the Flintstones. with Mark Russell and Steve
Steve
Pugh.
Pugh.
The idea that they would just throw this random stuff in the background that's like a third level joke. That's just in the background of a splash page or a panel.
Right.
It's.
I mean, the
if you
difference
catch
there
it,
is
great.
that even
if you catch
this
it,
whole
great.
thing,
If you don't, you don't.
this whole book feels like a joke to me.
In a lot of ways.
And it's not a laugh out loud thing. There's just every little thing. It's like, hey, just saw that. Just saw that.
There's a lot of Leo pointing at the TV meme there.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
By the way, Gene Ha did the inks as well, right? Not just pencils.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I own a Gene Ha piece, but it was pencil only by him. And I love his pencil work in this book. The inks at times are a bit heavy for me. However,
this first issue, though, I think they hadn't figured out what the routine was, and so if you notice, the character design specifically on a character like Toy Box changes in terms of how specifically her face is drawn, because I think there were panels and pages that some were done by Gene Ha, some were done by Zander Cannon, because they hadn't quite figured it out yet.
I can see the differences.
The way she looks early looks one way, and then specifically when we get to later on the homicide scene, when the first time she pulls out the toy box and they're investigating the saddle and things like that, you see her face in kind of a like a 2/3 big panel there, and it looks radically different. And that's because I think that was a Zander Cannon page, or vice versa, whichever one it was. So they hadn't quite figured it out yet. Eventually they got into the rhythm, like we mentioned last week, where when the scripts would come in, Zander Cannon did the layouts, because what they've talked about is that he has a real talent for kind of processing an Alan Moore script, taking it all in and putting it back on page. So he would do all the layouts, and then that would go to Gene Ha, because I think at the time, I don't know if they still both live in the same city, but they were both in Minneapolis. And if they weren't in the same studio, their studio was literally next to each other. Studios were next to each other. And so in terms of like handing off pages, it was literally like going next door. So Zander Cannon would do the layouts and kind of first pass at the script, and then Gene Ha would come in, do the finishes, the pencils, and I believe the inks as well, before going off to the colorist and then Todd Klein letter. So they hadn't quite figured it out early. I think, which is why, so if you see some discrepancy in some of the character design, that's where it comes from. But they eventually fall into a rhythm, which clearly worked for them in terms of how best to get the book done and out. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like I think some of the styling of the art, some of it feels very dated to me. You know, feels like an old 90s book. But then there are pages, you'll flip the page and it's not.
There is some,
and I'm talking specifically in the first issue.
I think there's some character stuff that is very much like we're coming out of the 90s era, which was kind of the Image era. We're coming out of that a little bit. If you read a lot of books from that time, a lot of them are really bad. It's a really, really low point in comics history, in my mind. You still see a lot of those remnants as we transition out of some of the kind of the notable artists out of the 70s and 80s who influenced the guys that came in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of those Marvel guys who then eventually started Image were moving out of those guys into kind of a new era. And you know, Gene Ha got his start in the early mid 90s. Is that kind of that first Marvel thing we mentioned last week, that Cyclops Jean Grey book, I think was like 94, 95, something like that. So he was in that era. He's brought up in that style. So you still see some remnants of it that I think is just like, if you know, you're like, I can probably date this book. You know, it's dated in Neapolis time in 1999 as well. So it is contemporary for when it, quote unquote, for when it was released. But you look back at it now, and I think if you know, you're like, this feels like a late 90s book, late 90s, early aughts. Like, it sticks out.
We're now living in a time where they're doing throwback covers to this era. And
yes, because now
nostalgia.
It's kitsch.
Right.
Yeah. Because the people that were kids who went to the comic shop and couldn't drop whatever it was for the foil lenticular cover, with the 3D hologram on it. Those kids, he says that there's someone else. Like, we're all adults now. we're all adults now, and so you put that back, and now it's like, oh yes, we'll do lenticular covers. Both Marvel and DC have done that in the past 10 years.
And now you can afford lenticulars, you just don't want them.
Yeah. Well, they're
but
only done now to be like, hey, look, we did a lenticular cover, we did a foil cover, we did a hologram cover, but so stuff like that. That there is, it's just because that's where the business, the consumer base is. But again, going back to the interiors, it is just the style. I mean, if you look at some of Gene Ha's art now, I mean, Zander Cannon stuff it evolves. It's different now, but this was the style of the times. This is what books looked like. The way they were inked, the way they were colored, everything presented about them. There was still very much kind of a house style, even if you weren't in a house. Does that make sense? Like comics all looked kind of the same. We hadn't gotten to a point where, like the book we talked about last week, last time, Deep Cuts, where an artist like Juni Ba and his style, like he wouldn't have done a DC or Marvel book because like his style just wouldn't have worked. They wouldn't have brought on creators like that. Now, in the past, definitely the past 10 years, going back almost like 15 some odd years now, maybe even 20 now at this point, where there is no longer really a house style at Marvel and DC because they bring in all these different artists. But where we were coming out of in the 90s into the early aughts, everyone drew the same. That's just what it was. If you drew differently, you were doing like a self-published book or like a zine or something. You weren't getting a book. You definitely weren't getting a book at DC or Marvel, and probably not a book at Image because the guys at Image all drew the same as well. They were all, the industry hadn't evolved yet. So I don't, while it may go in like a con category, it's a bit of a knock here that it does feel dated in a way, and just in how it looks visually. I can write that off because you're like, yeah, this is just what it was. This is what comics looked like.
Well, and there was still I think back a lot to our Lilo Rich interview. I think because he's the only colorist we talked to, but he was a colorist
from that era.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
he was coloring when that transition happened, and like the whole idea of Image was we have so much more color capacity in our printing compared to Marvel DC. He said he was doing early DC stuff, and it was like, oh, you want it to be blue? This is the blue. Make it match this. Fall in line or look bad.
There were style guides, which are awesome because they're drawn by some phenomenal artists and legendary artists, but there was a house style. And even though this book is a Wildstorm book, which, was an imprint coming out of Image at the time, but there was still a sense of you can look at this book and like this book also just looks like a Vertigo book from that era as well. From the late 90s, early aughts. From that wave of Vertigo, this book just it doesn't look all that different from something like Ex Machina, another book that we covered, which comes from which Ex Machina starts just a few years after this book. That's in 03, 04, 05. Well,
it was all after 9/11.
It comes after 9/11, yeah. So it probably comes out after this book is actually done, but it's in that same era of Vertigo, even though this isn't a Vertigo book. But there's still a style. You can look at that.
For the younger audience, 9/11 was in 2001.
Yes.
It feels crazy that I would have to say that, but just in case. Yeah. I know it's in history books now.
There is a feel. You look at it and just visually it does date it. But if you can get past that, with I can subject matter wise, because it is set in this different place, even though the year is 1999, it's set in this completely different place, this different world. There is a timelessness to the story that's being told because it's just a police procedural, at least on the surface.
Yes.
It's a cop show. So whether you're reading this or in a lot of ways like Gotham Central that Brubaker and Rucka did, or if you're watching Hill Street Blues, which Alan Moore mentioned as an influence, or NYPD Blue, or any of the 36 Law and Orders, or even like in NCIS or any sort of police adjacent procedural, this is that. It's case of the week, except here it's like case of the issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have to say I was a little disappointed in myself because I didn't enjoy this book as much as I think I should, and I think there's still time for me to bounce back. I enjoy it the more I go, but I think there are a couple things diminishing my joy here. One, knowing it's only 12 issues for like this creative team doing this series.
For this story, sure.
Right. So it's like branching out in all these directions. We're doing all these characters. You're getting like hints at their backstory, and all of this setup is like you're more than halfway through it now, and they're still setting stuff up. So it's like a lot of stuff to learn for a very finite series. The second thing is that I've been very pinched for time lately, and so I've been trying to do relatively quick reads, and this book punishes you for that.
It's dense. It's dense.
But it's an incredible value for the money.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
You get to oversize first issue, and then it's just like you can sit down and you can do one read for like the cop procedural, another read for like all the speciesism, the different power sets, like the kind of the X-Men aspect of it all, and then you can do a third reread just studying the background art to pick up all the Easter eggs. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to do all of that in one take, and it's like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah. I think you got to go through first and get a sense of what the story is, what they're trying to tell. Because I remember, I first read this book. I think I mentioned last week. There's the Vertigo branded full one volume trade of these 12 issues here from Moore, Cannon, and Ha that came out in 2015. That's about when I read it. So it's been about 10 years since I first read it, and going back into it, I hadn't touched it in a few years, probably about 5 or 6 years since I've reread it again. And I was reminded pretty quickly going in of the first time I read it, which was I didn't know what kind of story I was reading, because on its surface, because you're jumping around through all these cops, and that's the procedural aspect of it. And you see different cops work different cases, and then like in the next issue, you see kind of the wrap up, not the wrap up, but you see like the continuation, right? Because that's what they'd be doing. They went and arrested this guy the one time, and you followed them, and then all of a sudden, at the start of the next issue, you're following a different story, but in the background, there are those cops and that person they arrested. You see them there. And there's a part of you that reads superheroes, that I read superheroes, of like, well, is that connected? Like, why are they showing that? All these different crimes,
right?
And that's the superhero aspect of knowing who the creators are, knowing that these are superpowered people, and having that cognitive dissonance of, are you just reading the cases and like day in a life of these cops, or is there some greater mystery going on? Is all this connected? Because if you were reading what we'll call a regular superhero comic, the answer is, of course, they'd all be connected. The answer is, of course, all of these disparate, seemingly random crimes, of course, they're all connected, and they want you to sit around and think about how they're all connected, so you feel like you're ahead of the characters.
Well, it's water cooler talk for comics. It's like speculating about how the threads will all be tied up together in one bundle, and that's not how police procedurals are.
Yeah, exactly.
Not usually.
They may sprinkle something here and there, and like out of your old school 22 episode.
It's also important to
like 7 of them may be connected to a season finale, and you end it real big. That sort of thing. But here,
this is police procedurals before The Wire, and I do think that was a pivotal, transformative moment in the genre. But this is kind of, I mean, it's a little bit doing what The Wire like mastered, which was like, here are several disparate stories, and they will just bump up against each other, but they're not tied up because it's not fantasy. It's not like, oh, everything just gets wrapped up with one big bow on it.
I do have a note here that's like Wire-ish adjacent, kinda. Because like you don't want to make that comp, but if you know The Wire and you see this, you can see what the overlap is, I think what you're
There are a
talking
bunch
about.
of circles and it's a Venn diagram. Yeah.
Yeah. And like some of these things connect, and you get the sense because this is a comic, and you know that there is going to be some sort of overriding story because that's the nature of even anthology series. There's going to be some overarching story, but you don't know what you're reading. Like, I mean, early on in the first handful of issues in this batch, you know, it seems like there's some connection, right? You got the homicide, you got the serial killer, the one that's killing the prostitutes, you have the whatever their form of a drug dealer is and all that. But then you get like an issue where they take down a guy who's Santa Claus or pretending to be Santa Claus.
Psycho,
you know?
what do they call him?
Psychokinetic.
Psychokinetic
Yeah.
Santa. And they're
then
like getting him to control a reindeer.
And then right after that, they investigate the murder of a god for the entire issue, only to find out that this just happens every single day. Like this scenario,
Yeah.
you know. So you're like, well, what does any of this mean other than like that would have been a fun, like just
Day in the life.
episode television. Yeah, like you do this whole thing, and they're trying to figure out they're dealing with these gods and all this stuff, only to find out, be like, no, he's going to get up and be fine, and then you come back tomorrow and it would happen again because that's just what happens, you know. So is any of this stuff connected? And I think by the time you get to the end of this first volume, I think you're meant to be. I mean, maybe you're not meant to be off-putted by that, but if you're someone who has read a lot of superhero stuff and you see the sheen of superheroes here because everybody's got powers, and so you're thinking, well, there's got to be some sort of evil mastermind plan here, right? I think your brain can't help to go to that, and I wonder in some way if specifically Alan Moore, as he's writing this, had that in mind, because in a lot of ways this is a different form of superhero deconstruction that like he's often known for. We talk about the way that Watchmen is, and you know, Watchmen being the psychological idea of like, what does it mean, like a person who puts on a mask and does these things, like what kind of person would that be, and why would you, a regular person, trust them with your life? You shouldn't do that. And here it's like they're taking the idea of, he's looking at the idea of superheroes and just making it mundane. The idea that everyone's got a power, and sure, there are different power sets and what you can do and all this stuff and how they may help or hinder you. But if everyone's got a power, then like no one does.
Right. Well,
you know? And he puts these superpowered people through like just stereotypically mundane everyday life, dealing with family, you know, one of the cops has got a husband that's unemployed. He's unemployed because apparently he's a precog and he can only work in certain areas, but whatever, he's unemployed and they've got kids at home, you know, and she's got to go out and be a cop. You know, like very mundane, very everyday scenarios. They just happen to be in a world full of people who can do stuff.
well, what's interesting to me, and again, this is kind of the genius of Alan Moore, is because he's able to tell you things without like in your face expositional dumps. But there are like all of them have a shared sense of like what the normal range of power sets are. Because when there's an outlier, they're like, well, that doesn't sound right. And it's like, how can you tell? Everyone has crazy stuff, but they can tell. And that it doesn't really matter if I have the information to discern like, oh, this must be an extraterrestrial because they're doing X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, really? None of these mutant people can do that? And it's again, like, no, they can't. And you're not. They're in a position to judge, and I'm not.
They show that because the characters don't react that way. You know, if someone says something ridiculous or sees something that we, the reader, would be like, that's ridiculous, and it's completely nonchalant because it's just like it's Thursday for them, then that informs us that, oh, this is what the norm is. This is how it's supposed to be. And you're right. They are able to do that. I also love how they're able to convey a sense of history without massive exposition dumps. Little things about like, oh, right, you know, that Robin, that toy box, she's the daughter of a former cop, you know, this has been around, that the one like kaiju kind of Godzilla looking thing they keep arresting, he's the son of a former villain. They talk about how the dad fought so-and-so back in the 40s and all that, you know, so you get a sense that the place is lived in, that this is the way it's been for so long, that you have history, you know, people have been around, you have old timers on both sides of the law, and that this is just the world that everyone has grown up in. And they're able to do that and impart some of that knowledge here without feeling like you're just like, we're going to stop for a history check.
Right. Which part of me wants that, but I acknowledge what they're doing is superior writing because I could get through it a lot faster if I could just memorize the rules and then hear the story.
Yes,
but
but they don't
learning
wanna do
about the world is part of the story.
Yes, they want you to be active in the storytelling by having to pay attention.
Yeah. It's so it's all very well. It's like I said, I'm disappointed in myself because I didn't have the time I wanted to commit to it, to appreciate it. But for that reason, it's one that I will definitely return to. So I wanted to ask you if you had a favorite cop pairing here. I mean, isn't that kind of one of the procedural things of
yeah. I don't know. I like Irma and Girl One, and I like what is the name? The synesthete and the shaman, whose names I'm forgetting right now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like even you and I, reading this for discussion.
Detective Corbu, he's our kind of like your voodoo master, as it were. And then the other detective who is the synesthete.
They just call Sin, right?
I think they call her Sin. Yeah. I like them. But I think the pairings are fun, But I don't know if I have a favorite. Favorite.
Well, I was wondering if there's any intentional juxtaposition with some of the pairings. I think my favorite story is it like the explosive head guy, Pete and Dwayne get paired up together.
Yes, yeah.
And like their house call, like the cross species pairing and all those stuff. Like, and I gotta say the whole concept of a cowboy character pissed me off because it was just like, man, I don't care about cowboys, and it's so affectatious for, regardless of what his power might be, for him to go dressed around like a cowboy. But then it's just like, I don't know why. Of all the places to draw a line, I don't know why that would be mine.
Yeah, that shouldn't be the straw that breaks. But yeah, no, I think they're fun. I think because they're meant to be, I think, if not comic relief, but like a little bit on the doofier side.
Yes.
Yeah. The ones
which
that
I think is more the flavor of the book. I mean, I think
a little bit. Yeah. That not everyone, and because
the book isn't going to shock you with like, oh my gosh, what great detectives they are.
Yeah. I think they're showing a range. Yeah. Because I mean, again, you get Smacks, and the first time we really see him, like they're called to a domestic disturbance, to the Incredibles, by the way, which is fantastic. But as soon as he hears it, like the first thing we see him is like an action scene of him like bounding up the stairs. Like he's the guy who immediately jumps into action because he's that cop. Right. He's that stereotype. Again, the gruff, grizzled, too old for this stuff loner whose old partner died, and they put the new bright-eyed, bushy-tailed rookie with. Again, it's so stereotypical. The setup is so generic, and yet they're able to take it and spin that into this world that they have built, and at least at this point are still building in the first issue. Are able to take this very generic mundanity and put a little sauce on it to make it seem different and new, because it just has this added aspect to it of it's a crazy world that everyone's got weird powers in,
Yeah,
but the problems are still the same, right? Domestic disturbance, the great bit with the mice infestation at Dwayne's mom's house, and they bring in the exterminator, and what do they call them, like atom cats or atomic cats or whatever, and the idea it's like the sharks and the jets going at each other or something like that. But like the mundanity of that, you still have drug dealers, you still have prostitution, you still have a serial killer out there, incredibly, you still have homicides, and so you have the regular generic stuff you would see on any other police show. It's just it's taken up to a different level because of the people involved on both ends, both perpetrators, victims, and investigators. Everyone is on a heightened level. Okay,
so let me tell you, I got one small comp. So when the first person who has survived the Libra serial killer comes in, she's a prostitute. She's like, I'm not what you think, and I was like, what what is this in the late 90s that was happening that sports night, like episode one of the West Wing, it was all like, we're going to redeem the prostitute and show that there's more to her than just a prostitute. I just don't know. Like, was there a lot of really bad propaganda against prostitutes, particularly in the mid to late 90s?
I don't know. I mean,
I was too young for that, but it seems like a lot of people had that.
Pretty
point
Woman
to
was a
make.
decade before this, and so
That's true.
But I don't know. There may have been the cusp of having a recontextualization, a little bit of sex work. I don't know. But I mean, I don't think there's anything in the air about it. I think it was just them in this book kind of just making a point about the world that they live in, that the kind of place that Neapolis is. So yeah, I don't think there's anything any greater commentary they're trying to say about that.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's
other
any
than
great
these are
commentary
neglected people. Yeah.
by
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like
In the air.
why were they so obsessed with this? Like, now, granted, two of the examples I gave were the same dude writing within 12 months of each other.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't think you can say it was a trend because Sports Night and the West Wing did it. But yeah, it just struck me as like classic. And I feel like that storyline just doesn't come up as often anymore. It happened in How I Met Your Mother at one point. I think Barney like gets engaged to a woman that was not a prostitute, but a stripper. And they were trying to like destigmatize that. And How I Met Your Mother was famously 10 years behind every trend. I was like, yeah, it just kind of struck me as a little funny that they were like, well, we need to give her some background, some character. So she's going to be the noble prostitute. And I'm like, apparently that's just a big 90s archetype, which,
so.
I was in elementary school for most of the 90s. So I was not encountering many prostitutes.
I said maybe it's at early times of trying to recontextualize and reframe sex work in that way. I don't know. Maybe it was early vanguard of it. But again, I don't think.
There's certainly no deeper meaning in this context.
No. It was simply that the Libra killer was going after them, and they probably make for a convenient target. So
yeah. Yeah, so the Libra killer seems to be the only real overarching thread in
a little bit, yeah.
Seven.
Yeah.
And
well, they have like the drug dealer bust that they think ties to the homicide. Like but again,
right.
There are connecting threads, but you don't know if any of it actually connects to anything real. You don't know if it's going to amount to anything other than these cops are working cases that all seem to maybe just have one thread connected to them, on your corkboard. We don't have a ton of yarn on it yet, but maybe like one thread to it. But you don't know what's important yet. You don't know if it is a part of a larger conspiracy. And that's what I was saying earlier. The idea of the superhero brain, the comic hero brain, trains you to think it's all one big conspiracy. There's some mastermind on all of this, and these are all just the smaller things, and these cops don't know what they've started to uncover yet. They don't know what the larger plan is yet. But at the end of the first 7 issues, I don't know if you can, you can't say for certain if any of this matters, if any of this is connected. You have no idea.
Yeah, right.
You have no idea if there's some larger big bad, or you're just going to watch cops go about their day trying to solve petty crime.
Yeah.
Well, it's not all petty crime. There was a homicide. That doesn't count.
Well, yeah, it's certainly not all. Domestic violence. None of these are. None of these are like settling disputes between petty neighbors or anything like that.
Yeah.
So they're all dealing with like kind of felons.
Again, the regular stuff that any cop show would deal with.
Right. Yeah. Most cop shows do not deal in the mundane, except maybe Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but even at the end of every Brooklyn Nine-Nine season, there's some big case that it's like, we're working with the feds.
Every cop show is just going to, they're not dealing with, interdimensional plans to destroy the world. it's still it's homicides, it's robberies, you're busting drug dealers, things like that. However convoluted and twisted they make the procedural cases to be, they're still the kind of cases that regular people, quote unquote, regular people deal with. The whole Law and Order thing is ripped from the headlines, right? So this is just like stuff that has happened, just fictionalized. That's all we're seeing in Top 10. It's just versions of that. Again, domestic disputes, drug dealers, solicitation, you have a serial killer, things like that. But we haven't dealt with the, I guess the giant kaiju or whatever, but that still in a way is just like dealing with a second generation crook. It just happens to be that this guy's like a 60-foot, lizard person. So we haven't, nothing we've seen so far would necessitate a police force of superpowered beings,
Right.
and none of the crimes we've seen at their core would be crimes specific to a society of superpowered beings, how they get their drugs, what the drugs do to them, how they're manufactured, things like that. Maybe that's specific to superpowered people, but the base idea of there's someone making someone illicit and they're selling it on the black market and it's illegal. Like at its core, that's the same thing as busting a crack dealer, in some abandoned house in a rundown part of town, at its core, it's the same crime. So there hasn't been anything specific really to a superpowered society that anyone's had to deal with yet, which is
That's
just
an
the
interesting
regular
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are people who, well, yeah, I mean, I guess your big, Godzilla sized guy is using his powers or his innate size to perpetrate what would otherwise just be like drunken, disorderly conduct.
Yeah.
It's like he throws up in the street and they're like, get a hose out here. That's probably radioactive. It's everything's like, escalated because of the powers, but he wasn't, it's not like this is the Flash's rogue gallery they're creating tornadoes or Mirror Masters doing something with mirrors.
All he is an old time crook whose son is now a crook, and his son is locked up and he wants his son released. It's the same. It's just a second generation crook. You think about like the Libra killer is like some weird alien with this like kind of, these like microfiber things where she can decapitate victims or anything like super smooth and all that. Yeah. That's obviously super weird and all that, but it's a serial killer, targeting a very specific set of victims at a very specific time, in October, as it were, right? Because that's why it's Libra killer. Like they're on the lookout right now. So again, they tailor it specifically to whatever their world is, but the crime itself is just something that you would see, like any other whacked out serial killer we've had in real life,
Yeah. Can I admit that one of the stories had the timestamp of 1999, and I thought, oh, this is a flashback. This is someone's origin story.
Yeah.
And then I was like 3 pages, and I was like, God, I'm dumb.
No.
But
set 99.
Any other book that I'm reading right now, if it said something in 99, it's like, oh, we're going way back.
It is way back, but that's when the book came out, man. It's contemporary to when it was published.
It's literally broken my brain. I think all I can say is to process time in that way. That if Marty McFly were going back in time the same distance he did, then he'd be going back to 1995 right now. And, It makes me deeply, deeply sad to admit that, but not even. There's nothing to admit. That's just is what it is.
Yeah. Not great.
Anyway, well, did you have a favorite issue? I also meant to talk about Alan Moore getting into songwriting. There's so many lyrics, tunes on the radio, that is just another dimension of world building. And I'm like, now I'm not a huge Alan Moore reader, but I don't really recall that in like Watchmen, V for Vendetta.
But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of extra stuff he puts into all of his books.
Oh, I just meant like
full,
having to write. There's simple like pop meter But
Yeah.
you count syllables and you rhyme the
And rhyme.
ABA
Yeah, yeah. So
scheme or
you can figure out
ABBA.
what the verses are and all that. Sure.
Yeah. So it's like it's just a little extra writing challenge that he took on and is inserted in at least 3 or 4 of these issues. There's background music playing.
Yep. Yep. Something on the radio playing through. So
And just a little more depth in a book that really didn't need more Easter eggs, more depth, more layers.
Yeah.
But he's just, I looked at the cover price on issue 1. Shockingly, it's $3.50. I mean, it was a 36-page issue, but in
what it was.
1999, $3.50. That seems
what-
steep.
That's what it was. So
Okay,
yeah.
fair
Yeah,
enough.
Yeah. $2.99, $3.50, somewhere in that range. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, $2.99. I was like, yeah, I guess that tracks with me for back then. Trying to look at the other single issues, but I don't have them in front of me. The other ones didn't have prices on the covers, but yeah, first one being oversized, $3.50. But still, you get your money's worth with this book, whether it's in trade or single issue. The rereadability of it.
It is. Again, there is a timelessness to it because, again, you're just watching what you could say police procedural from the future, but it's not the future, but it's just from a different parallel dimension, a different world, as it were. So there's still commentary on our world in the way there is some commentary on policing and I think commentary on the way on this genre of storytelling. So yeah, you can, it's timeless in that way. So yeah, the rereadability I think is great. Before then, you were going to about to ask me if I had a favorite issue. I'm guessing, right? Or case. So I was
favorite issue or case because
I'll flip it on you. Did you have one that you enjoyed? I'll answer afterwards.
I think not favorite because it's best, but in issue 2, that Dwayne and Pete one, I think was just the first one that I was into and felt I'm finally tracking with all of this, and the fact that it was this is before all the studies on policing had been done. Pete's first incident is the guy who inflates himself out of self-defense. Yeah. He breaks up that prostitution thing, zaps that guy. He's feeling a little overheated. Now, according to modern police manuals, not all of them do this, but all of if they break up a domestic violence or something like that, they are I don't know, something percentage-wise more likely to go commit some crime, or some overreact on a petty traffic stop or something like that. And they are supposed to have time to decouple, calm down, reset, some time off after something that escalates like that. Instead, he gets back in the car with Dwayne and is immediately, in another heated domestic situation, and he's kind of boils over, and then, he's like, yeah, just stay out and watch the car. That doesn't go great. And, it's anti-robot slang. You get the speciest of it all. And you start to realize, even within the police department, and then you've got the tough cop later on that's taunting someone in an interrogation. Well, that's the dog. The dog cop is using racial slurs.
The sergeant. Yeah.
And so I don't know. I felt like that was the one where the whole thing started to slide in place for me. So I don't think it's the best story arc or issue by any means, but that was the one where I was like, okay, I get what we're doing now, and I'm on board.
And I think that's another example of showing that this is just any other cop show you've ever watched or read about.
Right. And it was and this has nothing to
different
do
about
with the case
these people
in the first one.
Yeah.
And this might not come up again, but now I know these characters.
Yeah. You understand again that these are regular people in any other police precinct anywhere you've ever read or thought about before. They just happen to have all these weird powers, and everyone around them happens to have weird powers. That's it. Only thing different. But fundamentally, as people, they're the same. They some are good at their job, some are bad at their job. All of that. There's a full spectrum, and I agree. I think that's a good thing to point out in terms of settling the reader.
Right, because it was
Yeah.
I was like, who the hell are these guys? I'm
It's
tired
not
of learning
fantastical.
things.
Yeah. It seems fantastical. It seems out there, but in reality, it actually is very grounded in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that it was like, okay, you saw Pete kind of blow up, and then it goes back to the precinct, but then you're back with Pete and Dwayne again, and it's like, okay, I've seen a little bit of these guys. Then they do another thing together, and they feel like real people all of a sudden. Even though you're still drinking from a fire hose, you're still meeting new people. You still don't know whose name is going to be relevant in a few pages, but whatever.
But you can recognize them. You recognize kind of what their style is. Again, they come off a little buffoonish, maybe not the sharpest tacks on the force.
Right.
Yeah. And you're shown that. And so you're now on guard anytime they show up, whether as you remember their names or not, they're drawn specifically enough that visually you recognize them.
And they're not going to be the leads on the Libra case,
Yeah, of course.
These are not, like, these guys are going to get the ordinary calls.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny that when Smacks and Robin Toybox, they get sent out to the Santa case, Jeff makes that comment like, well, you're sending me this one because it's stupid, because he feels like he's being punished because we find out there's some history with whoever that detective was that they had dated briefly. And so you get the idea that Dwayne and that there are cops that get sent on the dumb cases, and then there are the cops that sent on the real ones, the quote unquote real ones. And Jeff feels like he's kind of being punished. You saddle me with the rookie, you send me to the Santa case, things like that. So yeah, you get that again, this grounded sense of this is a work show, a workplace drama. The inner office dynamics there. So speaking of the Santa one, I think that's the one I enjoyed the most.
I thought that might be for you.
Yeah,
I was reading this and I was like,
it's fun, it's ridiculous. I love my favorite two panel bit is when the one cop who's called the Word, who clearly his power is he can compel people to do things, and they have to, and we get the great when he's doing it. It's these big bold red letters that Todd Klein does.
Yeah.
So that's when he's talking and when he's using his power. And I love when he shows up, the first thing he says is, if everyone could cease using your powers and put up your hands. And everyone around, like literally everyone, including all the cops, put their hands up because everyone has powers. And he stops. He's like, I'll rephrase that, because like it was too general. Because
and what was the one about no one making a sneak getaway? It was like you can leave normally, but no sneak getaways or something. I was like, just lots of tongue-in-cheek things. That are very much
the idea that again, he's trying to stop the criminals, like, because these criminals are using their powers. Don't do this. Stop whatever you're doing. But that also, by doing that, it means anyone within earshot, which would be anybody in town, anyone around them, would stop and put their hands up because that's what his power is. He's got to be mindful of that. So like silly comedic things like that, like sight gags, that's both a script gag and a visual gag, but like that stuff is fun to me, and it makes me that followed immediately by the investigating the murder of the gods right after that. So 6 and 7 right there.
Yeah.
To me, that's what this series could have been, where every issue is just here's some other wacky thing that they got to deal with. I'd have been happy if that's all it ever was. Because then that book can run forever. That's just an anthology. And then because I'm so comic brain, pill brain, that like, then you start seeding in serialized aspects, so that you can build to some larger thing at the end, because that's what I would expect to happen. But I'd been totally fine if this book was just, here's another issue and here are the 5 just like normie cases that are various pairs of cops and detectives have to deal with. Just here's what they got to do. And not because of some larger conspiracy, just because this is what's going on in the city that day, and that's all they got to deal with. And it's not connected to anything else other than this is what happens when they're on shift.
Yeah. By the way, I looked it up just for comparison. At the same time this was coming out, Batman was $1.99 an issue. and in 2000 jumped to 225.
I
So
think
the
Image
first
was in,
issue here being 350, and then
but
I think it's 295 an issue after that.
look up in what the cover price of Spawn #1 or any of the Image #1.
Oh yeah, right. That's a
Because
better comp because
yeah.
you were paying the creators for
Yeah,
the first time ever.
it would have been a little different then. I would imagine those are probably 299 if I had to guess.
Yeah. No, that's a better comp. But I was like,
Yeah.
I think when I'm flipping through my box and I see really old stuff, and by that I mean late 90s,
Yeah.
I expect below $2 or right around $2
Yeah.
most of the time.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, Spawn in 1994 was 195, but I'd have to scroll
all right.
way too long and it's nowhere near good entertainment. Oh, yeah. But by 96, it was up to, oh, that was a special issue. Never mind. It doesn't matter.
well, they were all special issues, quote unquote. But yeah. So so it would have been more expensive. It was double sized then. Again, you're also at this point you are simply paying for the Alan Moore name.
Oh,
Which,
for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's normal.
Spawn in 99 was 250. There it is.
There you go. There you
So,
go. And that's
right
a
on par.
much more relevant comp. Yeah, than main title superhero from Marvel or DC. So
Yeah. Anything else in your notes for this collection of issues? I realize there's a lot. There's like loose ends that we'll probably tie up next week in addition to dealing with apparently one of the greatest single issues ever written.
it is. Yeah. No, I don't really. I mean, again, because we talked a little before we started recording this idea that you can look at this book and go really granular with like breaking down every single case and seeing if there are threads or looking at every one of the crimes and the perpetrators and who the cops are on. There's a lot you can dig into, but I just don't think that this is that kind of book. I don't think it's interested in that. I think the specifics aren't important. I think it's more about the idea of just like these are cops that deal with stuff and this is the stuff they deal with, and it just so happens that the drug dealer does, has a certain type of power, or whatever, maybe because that's what his power is good at or something like that. Like the specifics, I think matter less here. It's more just following these characters as they just try to do their job and live their life. It is
Right.
just a procedural following these characters. And it's more about the world that they're building in and what are the possibilities of this world. And are those possibilities really any more different than what you would watch on a regular cop show on NBC or CBS or ABC or something like that?
Well, I gotta say, in a regular cop show, if they're questioning, somebody in possession of drugs or handling drugs or whatever, and they grab the cop's gun and shoot themselves, that's a good story. I mean, that's it's an interesting. That was, I mean, that might have also been back in issue.
That's issue 1 or 2, I think.
It was early, but I think,
Yeah.
I mean, it was like between that happening at the precinct and the stuff out in the field, I was like, okay, I get this now. And that guy shooting himself and what Dwayne and Pete are doing are not related, other than it's all happening to the same team.
Yeah.
And when they all sit down, which you don't get like a lot of the office dynamic of them like all sitting around brown bagging it for lunch or anything until the very end of like issue 7.
I was going to say, you
which
get
was
a little
really
bit,
nice.
Yeah, you get a little bit like a couple people, like a couple of the pairings, for lunch there, because Smacks likes to eat alone, and so Robin needs somewhere to sit. But yeah, you don't get the big sit down of everybody until the very end there, and that's one of those things that I think maybe the book probably could have had more of, just the cops talking around being like, man, geez, that was crazy what we had to do, and it just being like them describing whatever murder scene they had to come through, like any other cops would do. The kind of things you saw on The Wire, cops just talking about the things they have to deal with that are extraordinary because they're cops. They're dealing with extraordinary things. But here in the world of Top 10, where extraordinary things happen all the time, the things they're talking about are still just the regular cop things, and we don't get a lot of those moments. And I think those are the ones I think I enjoyed the most in general, just when various groupings had to be paired up for one reason or another, whether it's by circumstance or through whatever case they're working. I liked getting to see the various dynamics between the various cops and detectives and all that. That's the kind of, and that's just like the office drama stuff, the workplace drama stuff.
Right.
that shows have, that stories have. So those are the things that I like about the book kind of the most, especially this early part, just seeing how the characters interact with each other and the different cops, different philosophies, different skill sets, all that stuff. That's the stuff I find the most interesting over like whatever case they happen to be working on.
Okay.
Whatever case comes across their desk.
I actually have one last question.
Sure.
And it's only because it came up on like the last page of issue 7, again, kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That butt grabbing scene.
Yeah.
When it happened, I reread those panels several times, like looking for anything happening behind her. There's no indication that anything at all happened there, but it seemed like a weird throwaway line, especially since it goes to like the half-page accusation, and then and then the volcano-headed waiter says, "Hey, don't look at me, I'm dormant." I'm like, wait, was the whole thing a setup for that joke? I'm like, was it that stupid? But then like you jump ahead up 2 issues later, and she's like, "Yeah, I just wish we would have found that ass grabber."
Yeah. Well, and they see that earlier too. Like there is a random like 2-page backup. Like in the background, there's someone who comes in and files a complaint, a random citizen. So like that is seeded, and it's just one of those things that's there that you don't know if it's important, you don't know if it's silly, you don't know if it's part of some master plan, but it's one of those through lines that's just there that it could be a throwaway gag, it could be something important. It's like it's unclear. I think they call it the ghost groper or groper ghost, something like that.
Right. I was like, that has to be what you're getting to when it's very clear no one else is reacting, no one sees anything. Yeah, you see nothing.
Yeah, but you feel it, and so you think you're going crazy. But yeah, that's one of those things that's in there that you read about that you either think means everything or means nothing. You know,
and I took it as nothing. I took it as like it was a line. It was a setup for the dormant line, which was worth it, because it's like, why would you draw a volcano man for a waiter if you weren't going to make some kind of joke out of it?
Yeah, no, that was clearly a setup for that one joke. But again, why is it mentioned across multiple issues? Why is it brought up all this time? Is that you're trained to think it's either this is the key to everything or it's just a throwaway joke, right? You know. And it's kind of like,
well, in this case, I was like, now that I've accepted what the book is, in issue 7, there I was like, oh, I guess that's going to be villain of the week, in issue 8 or 9 or something.
Yeah.
But certainly not tied to like the Libra killer or anything.
But you're all conditioned to think that way because they end on it. It ends the issue and effectively ends the volume. So if you're reading this in trade back in the day and you pick this up, that'd have been the last thing you see before you pick up the next trade. So they're closing this arc on that. So,
and at the time, you would not have known this was only going 12 issues. Like I don't think
probably
it was
not
ever branded as a 12. No, like the marketing of a 12-issue maxi series didn't even exist. I don't think.
No, because miniseries wouldn't. They wouldn't have run 12 like that. No.
Yeah.
Something like this would have been. It would have, if it was explicitly a miniseries, it would have been like 6 issues, and it would have been announced. You know, the idea of running 12 and placing that at 12 initially, that idea really didn't. It wasn't common. So yeah, at this point, there's no way you would have known that, like, oh, this is only going to last. This version of the story is only going to last 12 issues. You may have thought it would have continued in some manner, and it did continue in some manner, just not with the same people. And these creators continued telling stories in this world, but not in the same fashion. So yeah, these 12 are all you get from this initial creative team, the creative force behind the story. So that's too bad, because setting it in this procedural framework, you could have told endless stories, because again,
that's the thing is
it becomes about the cops and not about what they're investigating. That's the reason why why people care about Law and Order and all this stuff, is because it's the characters, the detectives and all that they watch over and over again. It doesn't matter what case they're solving. They probably solve the same case 5 times in a season, just different skins on it. none of that matters. What matters is the characters. And so they've created this eclectic group here, and that you could have followed. You don't have to stay with Toy Box and Smacks, you know? Once you're in it, you could just have you can follow characters and they don't even show up, you know? And, you know, that happens a little bit here and there, but if this series just goes on, you know, if it's a much longer ongoing series, yeah, they could have done a ton of stuff like that. And that would have been awesome. I would have loved that. That'd have
Not
been so
even
much fun.
just a longer ongoing series, but I mean, what sort of ended up happening, because clearly these 12 issues caught you know, a lot of other people's imaginations and thought,
Oh, yeah.
oh, I would love to write in that world. And you know what so many people try to do now in the indie creator world is, you know, like Black Hammer was, you know, a Lemire project, but then he started like saying, well, you know, Matt, can't you write this one? And, you know, and then he was like almost not even involved with it for a little while, and then tried to do the same thing with like the Bone Orchard mythos. And, you know, there's all of these things where people are trying to create, you know, or the, what was the one that Patton Oswalt's real involved
Minor
with?
Threats. Yeah.
Minor Threats.
Yeah.
Minor Threats, you know, the Radiant Black universe. Like, this is the moment for, like, now 25 years later is the moment for this book.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if Alan Moore had taken this on in 2020, there'd be 6 different people writing it right now.
Well, if Alan Moore were a different kind of creator, yes. This is the type
if
of
Alan Moore weren't Alan Moore, yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. This is the type of book that you start, you work with your friends on, and then as it starts going, you bring your other friends in, and you become like story curator. You know, and it's what's kind of the way it's being branded now is kind of like microverses, because like what's called the Slaughterverse, which is Something Is Killing the Children, which, you know, all that comes out of James Tynion and with the Deladera, but they have like House of Slaughter, and they're bringing in all these other creators, the people they work with, different writers, different artists, under the same umbrella. It's all, you know, everything passes from a story standpoint. It all passes through Tynion's brain, just like Lemire and Black Hammer, just like Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt with Minor Threats. These ideas that you're curating these stories, that you have a main line, and then people you like to work with, other talented people in the industry, your friends, come in and write. You know, they're writing Precinct 10, but like, is there a Precinct 7 out there? What's happening there? You know,
right.
It's that sort of thing.
It's that easy.
Yeah. Maybe Precinct 7 is like out on one of the suburbs somewhere. Like, what do they deal with on a
where the normal
basis?
people live?
Yeah.
You know, the train stop that she's on at the beginning is in Precinct 7 territory. Maybe she lives out there.
Yeah.
And just comes to work in 10 because she's got powers.
And that's the kind of expansion you would see now, where all these books and they would all be 4 or 5 issue miniseries. You know, you'd have like 1,000 tabs in your box that are all top 10 related books.
Right.
You know, that is the modern approach to a story in a world like this, when you build it like this. That just didn't exist back in the day. And again, even if it did, Alan Moore isn't the type of creator that would have done that.
True. And it would have been pretty hard to market that without the internet. I mean, that's a lot of like those weekly comic news, like newsletter things they slide in there, and banking on people reading that and trying to follow the whole thing.
You're right. Part of the emergence of these microverses is a complete shift in our understanding of the industry. Like, these things couldn't have existed 20, 25 years ago, because the industry wasn't ready for it. And you're right, there was no way to get the idea of promoting your work in this way, and for a book like this to find an audience as quick as it can. You know, the reason that like Minor Threats can do the things it does, obviously Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum were big names. Patton Oswalt's a very big name, but like, that book doesn't do gangbusters, but it does well enough at Dark Horse that the audience that buys it, which includes me, is going to buy all the books, because they want to have all that stuff. That I buy all the Black Hammer stuff because I want the full version of that universe. I want to, you know, there's the completionist in me wants to have all those stories. And so, yeah, if this were any other creators in a different time, but you're right, this is the type of book. This has the bones of that kind of book.
I actually think it has better bones for it than some of the ones that are going right now.
It in a lot of ways it does, because the police procedural or the procedural drama is so tried and true. You know,
Right.
It's
Whereas,
been,
like, a Black Hammer book has to tie into one of those characters we met on the farm. Like, I mean, it doesn't, but it kind of does.
well, but
In some way. Whereas, like, this
the
would
Black
only this would never have to touch anyone we met in the original series. It just has to be in the world.
but like Black Hammer is riffing on all superhero universes. So
Right.
it's the same thing that Astro City did, which is why I love Astro City so much. It's playing on the fact that you know who the Justice League are and who the Avengers are and the X-Men are and all you know these characters, and they're just, here's a different version of that in this original world. That's what Black Hammer is. This is just a police procedural. We keep harping on that. This is the framework of this. You can lay anything on it now because it just comes back to the type of story that's been on television for like however long there's been television, you know, radio dramas, TV, you know, all of this is the most basic bones. It just has this very specific sheen on it. And say it's a world you could live in forever. And I wish we could have, and also I wish the expanded stuff, the sequels and spinoff stuff, I wish it was better. Because like Smacks is not a police procedural. Like, it's a completely different type of book. It's the same character, but tonally everything about it is like not even 180. Like, it's a completely different track. Like, it's a different sport. It's not even the same type of book. So even
I mean, I've flipped through it, and Smacks doesn't even look like Smacks.
Yeah, it's intentionally completely different, which is the kind of thing that Alan Moore would do with the story, which is, you know, that makes sense for him. But like top 10 season 2 and top 10 for the furthest precinct, the idea of continuing the procedural aspect of it, like I in general, I wish those were better. I wish those were more entertaining. And I wish there was more of it, and I wish it was better. But, you know, what we're left with instead, for the most part, for our purposes, are these 12 issues, which I think are really, really great. But there's a part of me that always longs for, God, this is so good. Why can't we just have like a little more of it? You know, there's always that little bit of like, the idea is so good, the setup is so good, and it's so open-ended.
How could you walk away from it? Yeah.
Well, I know. Well, yeah, but again, it's Alan Moore, so we know I can walk away from it.
Right.
But so I understand there's always going to be a finite limit on that, especially given the fact that he was working at DC kind of against his will, or at least against his wishes. But when I think about the base fundamentals of this story, just think like, God, this could have run forever, and I would have read all of them. You know. Yeah, because I did read all of this stuff, even if it was, even if everything was that great. I did read all of it. So clearly, I would have been totally in on more stories from the world that Top 10 created.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, you know, it's like, it's free money. How could you walk away from it? Again, Alan Moore.
Yeah.
You know,
he
it's like,
doesn't care.
There'd be a lot of money in licensing out movies for your books, but he doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
So anyway. We will wrap up next week with issues 8 through 12. Again, you know, I think if somebody's really vibing with this, there's no reason not to read the other material. Like, I think it's probably better than nothing. We're just not going to read it with you.
Yeah, well, we're not going to discuss it, but it's out there. You know, again, the completionist side that runs through a lot of comic readers and collectors, I think is prevalent. So yeah, I mean, it's out there. Read it.
I'm gonna read it because it's in the compendium.
Because you have
like,
it. Yeah.
Right. It's gonna sit next to my couch, and when there's nothing on TV, I'm just gonna grab it and be like, well, I might as well just keep going through that.
Yeah, you know, read the next miniseries. You know, this Smacks, I think, is 5 or 6 issues. The 49ers is a OGN that's equivalent of like 4 to 5 issues. From the Furthest Precinct is like 5 or 6 issues, and then the season 2 is like 5 or 6 issues. So like you can read them in those little chunks there that effectively work as just like mini story arcs. You know, you don't have to go and read them all at once. You can they're natural break points to sit and read a little bit and get a little more out of the world.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for reading along. Grab Volume 2, issues 8 through 12. And read and join us back here next Thursday. In the meantime, you can find all of our stuff in the links in this episode description. StoriedArcs.com, Instagram is Storied Arcs, Blue Sky Storied Arcs at .bsky social, whatever it is, whatever the nomenclature is there. You can find us there, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.